According to Pew Research, in October 1964, 77% of Americans surveyed said they trust the government to do what is right, either just about always or most of the time. But by June 2023, that number had fallen to just 19%. In other words, over the course of about 58 years, America's trust in our United States government has dropped by 58%. So today, less than 1 in 5 Americans trust the government. This lack of trust was further demonstrated in a question I asked in my last video. Which do you trust the most? Congressional leadership, free candy from a white van, or gas station sushi? Granted, this was far from a scientific survey, but of the people who responded to that question in the comment section, 45 people voted for gas station sushi, 3 voted for free candy from the white van, and 0 people said they trusted congressional leadership the most. And while we are on the subject of trust, Pew Research has also documented a similar decline in trust in journalists. As recently as 2018, 55% of Americans trusted journalists either a great deal or a fair amount, while 44% trusted journalists, quote, not too much or no confidence at all. Just 3 years later, in 2021, 60% of Americans responded they trusted journalists not too much or not at all. As always, links to all of my sources can be found in the description of this video. I am Dr. John Padfield, an engineer turned state representative turned business professor, and this is Business Reform, where we discuss issues at the intersection of business, technology, and society. While this particular video is more political in nature than most of my videos, it is nonpartisan because both major political parties have played a big role in undermining the public's trust in government. I'm making this video about declining trust in government for 2 reasons. The first is because government policy has a huge impact on business, technology, and society. Laws and regulations impact everything from the type of water heater you can buy, to the type of stove you can cook on, to the types and quantities of additives that can be added to the food we buy in restaurants and grocery stores, to guidelines about what the government claims we should be eating to stay healthy. But the second reason is even bigger, and it was best articulated by Ben Kingsley's character Cosmo in the 1992 movie Sneakers.
When I was in prison, I learned that everything in this world, including money, operates not on reality, but the perception of real.
How is it?
People think a bank might be financially shaky.
Consequence. People start to withdraw their money.
Result, pretty soon it is financially shaky.
Conclusion. You can make banks fail.
I've already done that. Maybe you've read about a few. Think bigger.
Stock market?
Yes.
Currency market?
Yes.
Commodities market?
Yes.
Small countries?
I might even be able to crash the whole damn system.
Just like banks, governments can collapse when trust in them drops below a certain point, and I do not want to see that happen in the United States. Just as I want to see more businesses behave in an ethical manner, I want to see our government behave in an ethical manner, so whether or not people agree with decisions being made by our government, they at least believe the decisions were made by people trying to do the right thing. In today's video, I will primarily focus on the most visible part of government, elected officials in the legislative and executive branches of government. Let me know in the comments section if you would like to see follow-up videos on federal law enforcement and/or federal regulatory agencies. The first reason I believe Americans are losing trust in government is cognitive decline. Let's face it, we have people from both major parties who have been holding elected office well beyond their best-by date. The Babylon Bee, a satire and parody news site, ran a story in July 2023 about a family who was torn between putting their 98-year-old grandpa, who suffers from advanced dementia, in hospice or having him run for the U.S. Senate. But on a much more serious note, according to a December 21, 2024 story in the Daily Mail, an 81-year-old Republican congresswoman from Texas had not visited her office in Washington, D.C. for 6 months. When a local reporter started doing research and trying to contact her, His calls always went to voicemail and nobody ever called him back. Her Texas office was, quote, a complete ghost town with no signs of anyone working there. Quote, she was reportedly living in a care home that specializes in memory loss after she had been found wandering, lost and confused in her district. It is not my intent to be mean or poke fun of these types of situations, and I am doing my best to be delicate on this subject. But the simple truth is that the Texas Congresswoman was not and is not the only person cognitively unfit to continue serving in office. The late Senator Dianne Feinstein was still voting on legislation at 90 years old in September 2023, even though, according to the Los Angeles Times, her daughter had power of attorney for her in legal matters. Even Newsweek admitted Senator Feinstein's ceding power of attorney to her daughter raises questions about whether the senator should remain in office. But when Newsweek contacted the senator's office, they declined to comment, saying that it was a private family matter. Then there is former Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell, who is still a senator but no longer the Republican leader. In July 2023, during a press conference, he completely froze up and had to be escorted away from the cameras. A few weeks later, it happened again on camera when Senator McConnell was talking to reporters. Having these types of episodes happen twice on camera within weeks of each other begs the question, how often does this happen when there aren't any cameras recording it? And last but not least, in July 2024, President Joe Biden dropped out of his re-election race for unspecified reasons. However, the media was quick to point out his dropping out of the race followed a disastrous performance in his debate with President Donald Trump. CBS News reporter Jan Crawford argued if the media had done a better job of covering President Biden's cognitive decline, that he might have not run for re-election or dropped out sooner, so Democrats could have picked a stronger presidential nominee during the primary. For anyone keeping score, I cited 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats who have shown signs of cognitive decline. The second reason I believe people are losing trust in our federal government and in the governments of at least a few of the states is the staggering level of hypocrisy some elected officials have demonstrated. This one is pretty self-evident, so I'm not going to spend much time on it, but here are just a couple of over-the-top acts of hypocrisy. In 2017, New Jersey Governor Chris Christie closed all the beaches in New Jersey due to a quote-unquote government shutdown. Well, he shut them down to the public anyway, but the beach was still open to him and his family. This is what we call rules for thee, but not for me. Then, in September 2020, after lecturing the public repeatedly about how irresponsible it is to not wear a mask, Nancy Pelosi was caught on a security camera at a hair salon not wearing a mask. And not to be outdone, in November 2020, California Governor Gavin Newsom was caught at a party in a restaurant where no one was wearing a mask in spite of his orders for everyone to wear a mask. If it weren't for double standards, some people would have no standards at all. In the greater scheme of things, does it really matter if Governor Christie goes to a beach he closed to the public, or Speaker Pelosi and Governor Newsom choose not to wear a mask when they thought nobody was watching? Well, yes and no. Those acts by themselves were not a big deal. What was a big deal is that those actions further undermine trust in elected officials. The next reason I believe people have lost trust in government is their inability to actually get things done. For instance, a while back I made a video about the 2021 infrastructure bill. According to a November 6, 2021 press release at whitehouse.gov, that piece of legislation provided $65 billion to build high-speed internet service to help ensure every American has access to reliable high-speed internet. It is important to note that $65 billion was split between 2 different programs. $42 billion was designated for the Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment Program, also known as the BEAD program, to provide underserved and rural areas with internet access. The legislation also provided $7.5 billion to, quote, build out a national network of EV chargers in the United States, which will, quote, support the president's goal of building a nationwide network of 500,000 electric vehicle chargers. That press release was published on November 6, 2021. So how is the government coming along on all of that? It is now January 2025. Have you benefited from the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, or have you used any of those new EV chargers? Chances are pretty high that you have not. According to a publication by the Washington Policy Center, a grand total of 0 people have been connected to the Internet as a result of the $42 billion appropriated to the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program as of September 2024. Worse yet, the expected rollout won't actually occur until 2026 by the most optimistic deadlines. And regarding the $7.5 billion designated for building new EV chargers around the country, according to the Associated Press, as of November 27, 2024, more than 3 years after the money was allocated, there are a total of 214 operational chargers across 12 states that have been funded through the law. Keep in mind, this is 214 chargers, not charging stations. This is an important difference. Many gas stations have 20 or more gas pumps, so depending on the number of chargers per station, these 214 chargers probably only represent a dozen charging stations, but I was unable to find the exact number of charging stations that have been created so far. I also want to point out the $7.5 billion has not all been spent. Again, I have not been able to find data saying exactly how much of the $7.5 billion was spent installing these 214 EV chargers. 214 chargers built in 3 years, with a goal of 500,000 chargers to be built in 9 years, means the government has only achieved 0.4% of its goal. But hey, that's still a better percentage than the number of people who have been connected to high-speed internet service due to the infrastructure bill. The next reason why I believe Americans' trust in government has dropped 58% over roughly the last 58 years is outright criminal behavior and corruption. Until I started researching for this video, I had no idea how many federal officials have been convicted of crimes while in office. To keep this list a little more manageable, I am only going to list members of the U.S. House and U.S. Senate who have been convicted during the time period that trust in our government dropped from 77% to 19%. Between 1969 and 1977, 14 representatives and senators either pleaded guilty or were convicted of crimes. Another 14 were convicted between late 1977 and 1981, and another 14 between late 1981 and 1992, and another 12 between late 1992 and 2007, including Representative Mel Reynolds, who was convicted on 12 counts of sexual assault, obstruction of justice, soliciting CP, and 12 counts of bank fraud. Way to go, Chicago. You really know how to pick 'em. Between late 2007 and 2017, there were another 10 convictions. And between late 2017 and 2024, there were an additional 8, for a grand total of 72 U.S. representatives and senators who were not only indicted, but convicted over the course of 55 years. That works out to an average of 1.25 convictions per year, and keep in mind, many of those convictions were for multiple felonies. The next reason I believe Americans have lost trust in our government is conflicts of interest. Several of the convictions we just examined were related to either conflicts of interest or insider trading because members of Congress have access to information most people do not have access to. The most recent major example of conflicts of interest involved members of Congress who made stock trades following a briefing on a widespread illness in early 2020. In what came to be known as the 2020 Congressional Insider Trading Scandal, the Department of Justice initiated an investigation into stock transactions made by multiple senators following a closed Senate meeting. No charges were filed against anyone, but the headlines about the senators profiting from those stock trades angered a lot of constituents. The final reason I believe Americans have lost so much trust in government is simple, old-fashioned lying. In the 1975 movie 3 Days of the Condor, Robert Redford's character, Joseph Turner, explained the way a lot of politicians seem to think today.
You think not getting caught in a lie is the same thing as telling the truth?
I could easily make a 3-hour video just about politicians lying, but I'm going to stick to just 2 of the most blatant examples, the types of lies that make you wonder how they were able to say it with a straight face, because it was so obviously false. The first example has to be one of the dumbest statements ever made by a politician on camera.
It's going to be very, very exciting. But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
No, former Speaker Pelosi, no bill ever has to be passed for people to see what's in it. My second example of dumb things said by politicians on camera goes to Speaker Mike Johnson. Shortly after becoming Speaker in October 2023, Mike Johnson promised to release approximately 44,000 hours of video recorded by Capitol security cameras on January 6, 2021. I fully supported this decision because I believe in transparency. I was extremely disappointed when he later announced a massive delay in releasing the video because he wanted to blur the faces of everyone in the videos. But it was his explanation for why he wanted to blur the faces that earned him a spot in this video.
We're going through a methodical process of releasing them as quickly as we can. As you know, we have to blur some of the faces of persons who participated in the events of that day because we don't want them to be retaliated against and to be charged by the DOJ.
So Mike Johnson is blurring the faces of J6 protesters to prevent the Department of Justice from seeing their faces. Speaker Johnson, I hate to be the one to break this to you, but the Department of Justice has had access to unblurred copies of those videos for nearly 3 years before you became Speaker. Blurring people's faces is not going to stop the DOJ from going after anyone. However, if there were any federal law enforcement officers undercover and or FBI informants who were caught on those cameras, I could see where they may want to have their faces blurred. And just last month, we learned from the Inspector General's report that there were 26 FBI informants in the crowd on January 6th. Personally, I consider Speaker Johnson's explanation of why he had to blur the faces from the J6 video just as big of a lie as Speaker Pelosi's statement about we have to pass the bill for you to see what's in it. We know from Pew Research that Americans' trust in government has dropped dramatically over the past 6 decades. And these are the top 6 reasons, I believe, why so many Americans have lost trust in our government. But what do you think? Did I include things you don't think are really that important? Or did I miss factors that you think are very important? Term limits might help with some of these issues, but they are not a silver bullet, and they come with their own set of unintended consequences. If you would like to see a video on term limits or videos on why people have lost trust in federal law enforcement and/or regulatory agencies, please let me know. I am looking forward to reading your comments.